After my parents passed away, Herbert took me in. When I was 20, I stood before him, taking off my clothes piece by piece. "Teach me how to be a woman," I said. He looked me over for a long moment and then turned away. "I'm not interested in little girls." Later, I brought my boyfriend home and kissed him in front of Herbert. Herbert went mad, dragging me into a room, loosening his tie, and tying my hands. His eyes were filled with a bottomless desire. "Isn't that what you wanted? To be a woman?" He said. "Turn around and get into position. Teach me how to be a woman," I repeated, staring into Herbert's eyes as I removed my clothes one by one. My shirt, skirt, lingerie, underwear until I was completely naked. Herbert held his cigarette between his fingers, the pale smoke drifting from his lips. He looked me over from top to bottom, his face expressionless. After a long while, he finally said coldly, "I'm not interested in little girls." My lips turned white instantly, and cold sweat broke out all over my body. I lowered my eyes, unable to look directly at Herbert. His words felt like acid, burning my self-esteem to shreds. He threw a blanket from the couch at me, his voice as calm as ever. "I see myself as your elder. You should be with someone closer to your age. Don't degrade yourself for me." 6 years ago, our family was in a car accident during a trip. Of the 3 of us, I was the only survivor. Relatives wanted to adopt me because adopting me meant inheriting my parents' estate. They fought fiercely over it, completely disregarding the fact that I was just 14 and had lost both my parents. Herbert appeared at that time with my father's will. The will stated that if anything happened to my parents, he would take care of me until I came of age. The relatives were dissatisfied, but were intimidated by his mere glance. He reached out his hand to me in the corner. His gaze was deep and unreadable, his voice low. "Hermosa, come with me." I looked at his hand, hesitated for a moment, then took it without hesitation. He saved me from my vulture-like relatives and took me to his home. The phone rang, jolting me back to reality. I realized I had been standing there naked for quite a while. I hurriedly dressed and checked my phone. A message from my friend, Venus Bridges. Read, "Venus Bridges, how's it going? Did you get your celibate uncle?" I replied with just 2 words, "No." If it weren't for her terrible idea, I wouldn't have been humiliated by Herbert. I closed my phone, lay down on the bed, and stared at the ceiling as tears slid from the corners of my eyes. I couldn't remember when my feelings for Herbert began to deteriorate. Over the years, he had taken good care of me, almost fulfilling my every need. He organized a grand coming-of-age ceremony for me, attended by almost every notable family in the capital. Someone joked, "Oh, the child bride you've meticulously raised has grown up. Should we start calling her sister-in-law now?" Herbert shot the person a cold glance and said, "I only like women, not little girls. Please refrain from making such inappropriate jokes." I was close enough to hear their conversation clearly. From that day on, I wondered how I could become the woman Herbert wanted. I tried dressing more maturely, only to be met with his comment, "So ugly, not suitable for you at all." Today, I finally understood that in his eyes, I was still that 14-year-old girl, orphan and cowering in the corner. I would never become the woman he wanted. Herbert disappeared. Not even a note was left behind. The housekeeper said he had gone on a long business trip and didn't know when he would return. I knew he wasn't on a business trip. He simply didn't want to face me. Venus Bridges noticed my low spirits and suggested taking me to a bar to see a new world. Previously, I never went to bars because Herbert didn't like it. Now, I just wanted to indulge myself. Venus Bridges rolled her eyes at the line of male models and glared at a sycophantic man. "Is this all you've got for me?" she asked. The man waved his hand, and another batch of male models came up. Venus Bridges patted my hand and said, "Sister, choose whoever you want tonight. I'll cover all expenses." I drank quite a bit, enough to blur my vision. In the dim bar light, the occasional flash of color lights illuminated a male model standing in the corner, revealing a beauty mark at the corner of his eye that looked exactly like Herbert's. I pointed at him. "I want him." The male model looked at me and smiled. He sat her day down beside me, and I noticed he was incredibly handsome. The dim light highlighted his profile from brow to nose, his pitch black eyes like a deep lake, unfathomable. My gaze lingered on the beauty mark at the corner of his eye. "What's your name?" "Don." Unable to resist, I reached out and tapped his beauty mark. He didn't move, looking at me with interest. "Like it?" Perhaps because of the alcohol, I felt bolder. I nodded and asked, if I wanted to buy that beauty mark, how much would it cost? Don's gaze darkened, and his voice became low and husky. "The beauty mark isn't for sale separately. You'd have to buy me." I chuckled lightly and teased, "Don't worry, I'm not short on money." The next morning, I struggled for 3 minutes to get out of bed. My head was throbbing, and as I sat her day up, I saw Don lying on the sofa. I was stunned, trying to recall what happened last night, but couldn't remember anything. Just then, Don woke up, rubbing his eyes. The first thing he said was, "Don't worry, nothing happened." I sighed in relief, feeling awkward. "Let me give you a ride," He seemed pleased with my nervousness and looked at me with interest. You clung to me tightly last night, and now you're eager to send me away. I pursed my lips, got up, and took a check from the drawer, filling it out and handing it to him. Your payment for last night. Don glanced at the check and gave a deep chuckle. I only accept cash. Where am I supposed to get cash now? I asked. Don took out his phone, showing me his Wicket QR code. Add me on Wicket. Contact me when you have the cash ready. I had no choice but to add him on Wicket and urged him to leave quickly. As he reached the door, Herbert unexpectedly came back. Herbert's face darkened instantly. Who is this? I blurted out. My boyfriend. To prove it, I grabbed Don by the collar and kissed him. A strange and awkward atmosphere enveloped the room. Herbert stared at me, his gaze heavy and oppressive. His scrutinizing eyes felt invasive. I felt my heart race, my back stiffening, as though my heart might leap out of my chest. I introduced Herbert to Don. This is my uncle, Herbert. Don extended his hand. Hello, uncle. I'm Hermosa's boyfriend. Herbert's face darkened even further. Without looking at Don, he coldly ordered, Aunt Juan, show our guest out. Aunt Juan quickly stepped forward and escorted Don out. Herbert pulled me into a room and, in a frenzied state, loosened his tie and bound my hands. Feeling bold now, already looking for a boyfriend, he asked, as if possessed. I was terrified, unable to speak. I had never seen him like this before. He caressed my face, his thumb sliding down slowly, his touch gentle but his gaze was terrifying, methodically destroying my reason. I turned pale, instinctively denying. No. Herbert flipped me onto the bed, and I couldn't react in time. My back hit the bed hard. My voice trembled. What are you going to do? He leaned over, gripping my chin and forcing me to look at him. Isn't this what you wanted? To be a woman? His eyes were filled with a profound desire, and his voice was low and commanding. Turn around and get into position. Herbert lowered his lips to mine, with no tenderness to prevent me from struggling. He tightly held the back of my head. His fierce demeanor made me forget to fight back. He silenced my cries with his lips and tongue, and my protests turned into shallow whimpers. I struggled with all my might, but found Herbert's strength terrifyingly overwhelming. My struggles were quickly subdued. I slapped his face hard, causing his head to turn. I cried out, Herbert, you can't do this to me. Herbert lifted my chin and examined my panicked expression. He sneered, can't what? Can't kiss you? Can't sleep with you? Didn't you strip in front of me and ask me to teach you how to be a woman? Now you're refusing. Are you scared, or are you trying to stay faithful to that boyfriend you suddenly found? His words were like a blow to my heart, and my tears fell on his hand without him caring. He used to be heartbroken over a single tear. Now, I felt like a plaything trembling in his hands. He brushed aside my hair gently, but it sent chills down my spine. I'm gone for a few days, and you already find a boyfriend. Have you grown wings? I shouted. You told me to find one. You said I should be with someone closer to my age. He laughed lightly. Yes, I said that. Then his smile vanished, replaced by a fierce expression. But now I regret it. You're not allowed to be with anyone else. I've raised you for so many years not for you to kiss another man in front of me. You belong to me for life. Don't even think about being with anyone else. Herbert didn't do anything beyond that kiss. I cried in his arms, and he gently stroked my back, calming me to sleep. After my parents passed away and Herbert brought me home, I would have nightmares almost every night and wake up screaming. He would hold me, soothe my emotions, and calm me back to sleep. It seemed that only his embrace could help me find peace. By the time I woke up, he was already gone from the bed. I would stare at the empty space beside me, and the feeling of abandonment would wash over me again. I quickly got out of bed. I didn't see Herbert in the living room or the bathroom, clinging to a last shred of hope. I pushed open the door to the study and, seeing Herbert there, my nose tingled and tears began to fall. The doctor said I was suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. Witnessing my parents' deaths had severely impacted my mental health, and I had undergone a long period of treatment. It had been a while since I last felt such a sense of abandonment, but now it was back, and I felt powerless against it. I shouted at Herbert, venting my emotions. I choked on the words, swallowing the term abandon, back down. Noticing something was wrong, Herbert set aside his documents, walked over to me, and held me tightly. His hand gently stroked my back. His voice was soft and apologetic. I'm sorry. I suddenly had an urgent meeting. I shouldn't have left you alone. Don't worry, I'll never leave you. I'll always be here with you. Herbert's voice was starting to overlap with my memories. I recalled that rainy night when the entire city was engulfed by heavy rain. I woke up screaming, and Herbert held me tightly. I begged him not to leave me, not to abandon me. Herbert had said, I'll never leave you. I'll always be here with you. After leaving the classroom, I immediately spotted Venus Bridges waiting for me. She approached and hooked her arm around mine. You were so secretive on the phone. What's going on? I took Venus Bridges to a corner of the cafe, set my professional books on the table, and told her about what had happened the previous day. Venus Bridges looked astonished, I frowned, but I stood in front of him naked, and he said he wasn't interested. Now he's kissing me and saying he'll never leave me, and he's even insisting I break up with that male model. Venus Bridges had a lovesick expression. That's the charm of older men. I didn't understand what she meant and rolled my eyes. Venus Bridges explained seriously: restraint, patience, obsession. These are the key elements of the lure of older men. A man who says he's not interested in younger girls, but goes wild wanting to possess you after you kissed another guy. What else could that be but love? You were raised by him, so let him. Venus Bridges gave me a rude look and nudged my shoulder. What's the harm in sleeping with him? I think you might actually be more eager for something exciting between you two that you can't tell anyone. Seeing my silence, Venus Bridges advised me, don't restrict yourself so much. There are no perfect men in this world, and no perfect love either. Trying it out might show you that you're not compatible, and you can stop before you get hurt. If you don't take the step, believe me, you'll regret it for the rest of your life. I looked back at my professional book, and Venus Bridges leaned in and whispered, you should read more romance novels, instead of burying yourself in study every day. I chuckle lightly. When I'm performing surgery on you in the future, you'll rest easy on the operating table, knowing how hard I studied. Venus Bridges shrugged. Makes sense. Our future surgical goddess should study hard. I enjoyed Venus Bridges' lively attitude and smiled indulgently as I continued my studies. My phone suddenly rang. I looked at the screen. It was a message from Don. Male model, when will you pay? I sent him the address of the cafe and waited for Don. Don arrived quickly. Venus Bridges, who had been gossiping, frowned a little upon seeing Don and looked somewhat serious. Don had a faint, enigmatic smile on his lips as he asked, have you prepared the cash? I took an envelope out of my bag and handed it to him. When he reached for it, I noticed the 7-figure watch on his wrist. Last year for Herbert's birthday, I had bought him the same watch, so I knew its price. Do male models earn that much? He pinched the thickness of the envelope and looked at me with a teasing expression. You're quite generous. I looked at him expressionlessly. Thank you for taking care of me last night. Consider this money as a token of appreciation. I hope we won't have any further contact. His smile frowned on his face, and his gaze became intense and unsettling. I felt uncomfortable under his stare and didn't know what to say, so I turned my face away and took a sip of my coffee. He repeated, my name is Don. I frowned, wondering why he was emphasizing his name. Again, did he think his name was impressive, or was he worried I might forget it? I replied, I know, you've mentioned it before. Don's eyes flashed with a hint of disappointment, but it was fleeting, making me doubt if I had seen it correctly. He stood up and, before leaving, said, I think we'll meet again soon. After Don left, Venus Bridges, who had been silent, asked urgently, how did you end up with him? I explained, he's the male model you hired for me yesterday. Venus Bridges' smile faltered, and her voice rose. Don't joke around. I frowned. I'm not joking. The heir to the Toynbee family is a male model. Hermosa, are you still asleep, or am I hearing things? I was surprised. What? Venus Bridges rolled her eyes. Don Toynbee, the heir who's been abroad due to health issues, is him. I asked, are you sure you're not mistaken? Venus Bridges took out her phone and showed me a photo. Mistaken. My brother took me to a party last week, and he was at the main table, looking at the man in the photo, who was gazing down at his phone. It was indeed Don. She continued to complain. How embarrassing for me. I hired him to be your male model. I looked in the direction Don had left, almost grinding my teeth. Indeed, rich people are so stingy. He's so wealthy, and still wants to scam me out of $20,000. My relationship with Herbert had changed subtly since that night at the dinner table. He suddenly asked, did you break up? I didn't immediately react, looking at him with confusion. Once I met his cold, slightly jealous gaze, I quickly realized, yes, we broke up. Herbert looked at me with skepticism, lightly clinking his knife and fork. He cut a piece of beef and slowly brought it to his mouth. His gaze felt heavy and oppressive as it swept over me. I put down my knife and fork and raised my hand in a pledge. I promise, I have no relationship with him now. Good. He eyed me, his tone laden with threat. If you ever say something about having a boyfriend in front of me again, you better watch out. I was somewhat displeased. Don't act like a superior elder trying to discipline me. You may be the high-ranking Herbert at work, but in this house, it's different. I really dislike your condescending way of lecturing me. Herbert laughed in anger. I'm lecturing you from a high position. Who dared to slap me around? You slapped one side of my face, and I had to present the other side. Afraid you weren't satisfied after you were done. I even had to blow on your palm, worrying you might hurt yourself. That was true. I lifted my chin in a haughty manner. Herbert lowered his gaze and continued eating his steak. I hesitated like a little girl and asked him, what is our relationship now? Herbert's gaze darkened a bit as he looked at me. his lips curling into a cryptic smile. He stood up and kissed my lips. I responded to his kiss. And just as I was about to run out of breath, I heard him whisper in my ear, "A relationship where we can kiss anytime." After the midterm exams, Venus Bridges and I were still at the cafe checking our results. Venus Bridges looked at my grades in disbelief. "How come? While others' grades drop when they're troubled by love, yours remain stellar." I replied proudly, "Maybe I'm clueless about personal relationships, but I'm definitely not a fool when it comes to my studies." Venus Bridges clapped. "Right. I forgot you're a genius girl who's consistently topped the charts since starting school. No one can surpass you." Who would have thought that even on the day Herbert rejected me, I had managed to calm myself at my desk and study intensively for 5 hours before going to bed. Being reduced to a mere genius for my hard work still irked me a bit. I took out my book to continue studying, but Venus Bridges put her hand on it. "The exams are over. Do you still need to torture yourself?" I didn't hesitate. "Yes, I need to keep pushing myself. The midterms are over, but I haven't gotten my doctoral degree yet." Venus Bridges looked at me, seemingly thinking of something, and asked, "Will you continue being a doctor after you become Mrs. Ford?" I looked at her in confusion. How many rich wives are doctors? I was taken aback, unable to answer, since none of the wealthy wives I knew were doctors. Venus Bridges' expression turned serious. Would Herbert prefer his wife to be a doctor or a supportive homemaker? I calmly replied, "I don't know what Herbert wants, but I know I want to be a world-class surgeon. No matter if I become Mrs. Ford or someone else's wife, I will still be Hermosa." Venus Bridges looked at me with pride. "Good. If you had said you'd give up your dreams for a man, I would have slapped you right now." I smiled lightly and gently tapped her on the head with my pen, then looked down to continue reading. I accompanied Herbert to a charity gala. Herbert was chatting with someone not far away, and I was staying with Venus Bridges in the corner, hiding from her brother. Venus Bridges took a sip of champagne and pointed at a wealthy woman across the room who was glaring at Herbert. "Is that the mistress from the Ford family who climbed up the ranks by stepping over Herbert's mother? Look at the way she's looking at Herbert, like she wants to devour him whole." I followed Venus Bridges' gaze and saw the woman glaring at Herbert with resentment. I explained, "I heard the Ford family is on the brink of collapse. Seeing Herbert's success now must be hard for her." Venus Bridges sneered. She thought she could live the high life by being the mistress, but she ended up on a sinking ship. Herbert's actions likely accelerated the Ford family's decline. Shortly after his mother passed away, the mistress moved in and became Mrs. Ford. Herbert, furious, left the Ford family. He had a point to prove, to show the Ford family and make his late mother proud. He worked tirelessly, attended countless social events, and lowered his profile. He truly succeeded. Shewa Group had already surpassed the Ford family, which was on a steady decline, while Shewa Group under Herbert's leadership had a bright future. The glory of the Ford family was in the past, and everyone knew that as long as Herbert was around, the Ford family would never rise again. As I spoke with Venus Bridges, I saw a woman trying to flirt with Herbert, lifting her hand to touch his arm. Herbert took a step back, leaving the woman's hand hovering awkwardly in the air. She awkwardly withdrew her hand and fixed her hair. I frowned, and Venus Bridges was even more infuriated. "What a shameless woman. But you shouldn't let it bother you too much. After all, Herbert is handsome and rich, so naturally, women will flock to him." I pursed my lips unhappily. "I know that, but it still makes me uncomfortable. Why does he have to be so handsome? Being handsome doesn't put food on the table." Venus Bridges patted my shoulder and said earnestly, "Remember, my friend, a husband's looks bring glory to his wife." I chuckled lightly. Just as a commotion erupted from the crowd, everyone's attention turned to a certain spot, and Venus Bridges and I followed their gaze. Don appeared, impeccably dressed in a suit, exuding a distinguished aura. The moment I looked at him, I met his cold, piercing eyes. He scanned me from head to toe and then locked his gaze on my eyes. We stared at each other for a long while, and I felt a bit disoriented. Venus Bridges muttered, "Damn it, how did he get here? Herbert is here too. Isn't this the so-called battlefield of the gods?" I glanced at Herbert, who was watching me intently, his expression unreadable. It seemed he was assessing my reaction to seeing Don. Unease surged through me. It looked like my distraction at seeing Don had displeased Herbert. In my fluster, I accidentally spilled champagne on my dress. I quickly fixed the stain in the restroom and braced myself to return to the banquet hall, despite Venus Bridges' barrage of messages. As I turned the corner in the hallway, I unexpectedly bumped into Don, who was waiting for me. "You blocked me," he said. "I told you, we don't need to stay in touch," I replied. Don's face showed a hint of hurt. "You still don't recognize me?" I frowned. "What do you mean?" Don extended his hand, and I noticed the scar on his palm extending to his wrist. I was momentarily stunned. In disbelief, I looked at him and croaked, "You're Don." He nodded. You didn't recognize me. I'm hurt, but I recognized you right away. When I was 10. Dawn and I were kidnapped at a party hosted by the Toynbee family. The kidnappers had a grudge against the Toynbees and wanted Dawn's life more than money. I was only involved because I witnessed the kidnapping. The scar on his palm was from that time. I remembered him bleeding heavily, and I tore a piece of my dress to help bandage his wound, reassuring him that we would be okay. But how could we have been okay? The kidnapping nearly destroyed Dawn. After being rescued, he remained unconscious, and doctors couldn't determine the cause. Eventually, Dawn was sent abroad by the Toynbee family, and my family never mentioned that incident. I tried to subconsciously forget those hellish days, and after my parents' death, I found it even harder to revisit other painful memories. I stiffly forced a smile and said, "Sorry, I didn't recognize you." Before Dawn could respond, Herbert's voice suddenly cut in. "Hermosa." I turned to see Herbert, who must have arrived unnoticed. His gaze swept over Dawn and me, and he gestured for me to come over. "Come here." Without hesitation, I walked over to Herbert, linking my arm with his and turning to Dawn. I said, "I'm glad you're okay now." Dawn's smile faded, and his dark eyes turned cold and menacing. Although he was speaking to me, his eyes were fixed on Herbert. "I'm glad too. Let's catch up next time." He emphasized the word catch up. Herbert shot him a disdainful look and snorted. I wanted to explain to Herbert, but he wouldn't give me the chance. Once we got in the car, he closed his eyes and pretended to be dead. When we got home, he went straight to his room, refusing to speak a word. After preparing what I wanted to say, I opened his door to explain, but he was nowhere to be found. The butler informed me he had gone out, which I knew was his way of avoiding communication. The next day, while reading a book in a cafe, someone sat her down at the seat across from me. I initially thought it was Venus Bridges, but when I looked up, it was Dawn. Dawn was casually looking at me, his shirt unbuttoned a couple of buttons, giving him a relaxed, untamed look. "I wanted to catch up with you," I responded blankly. "There's nothing to catch up on between us. I'm glad you're okay now, and that's all." "You like Herbert," Dawn said. I admitted openly. "Yes, I like him. He treats you well. Over the years, he has taken great care of me. We are related by blood, but he has supported and cared for me solely because of my parents' request. His kindness is pure." Dawn sneered. "Do you know that when he took you in, it was because by raising you, he could inherit 50% of your parents' estate?" For Herbert, who had just cut ties with the Ford family, and was at the start of his career, it was a substantial amount. "Do you still think Herbert's kindness towards you is pure?" My expression darkened. "How do you know all this?" "As long as I want to know, I can find out everything," I said dismissively. "I'm not related to him by blood. If he didn't care for me out of interest, that would be more concerning, wouldn't it?" Dawn persisted, asking, "He's 10 years older than you. What exactly do you like about him? Or do you just enjoy playing the role of a caregiver?" I looked at Dawn, surprisingly calm. I love Herbert's maturity, his calmness in dealing with situations, and his ability to stay composed even in the face of adversity. I love his soul, his restraint, and his aloofness towards others, which turns into an unspoken affection only for me. He's seen me at my lowest, helped me overcome my pain, and witnessed me climb out of the mire step by step. Finally, I told Dawn, "I can give many reasons why I like him, but I don't owe you an explanation. There's no need to explain to an outsider why my choice is Herbert." Dawn's dark eyes were cold and severe. "We went through hell together, shared a painful memory. We are the most suitable for each other." I realized that Dawn was still trapped in that day of the kidnapping and had never moved on. The kidnapping case ended a long time ago. You should move on from that old warehouse. The past, like a living quagmire, will eventually catch up with you and consume you, but we can't live in the past, constantly consumed by the fear of it. I met his probing gaze. "I don't want to look back at the past. I want to look forward to the future. My future is with Herbert." When I got home, Herbert greeted me with a sarcastic tone. "Back early today, not going to catch up with anyone." I sighed. "Can you stop being so sarcastic?" I wanted to explain, "But you're avoiding me and refusing to communicate." Herbert smirked, but his smile didn't reach his eyes. "Oh, now it's my fault." I frowned and asked, "What exactly do you want?" Herbert looked at me with an earnestness I had never heard before. "I want you to love me, even when you don't like me. Love me no matter what." My heart pounded uncontrollably, as if it might leap out of my throat. The impact of a superior's vulnerable plea for love is indescribable. Insecurity truly is the most powerful cosmetic surgery for a man. "I'm afraid you might think I'm too old. I'm afraid you might mistake your dependency on me for love. I'm afraid you might abandon me. I'm 10 years older than you, and I'm afraid I'm not worthy of you. You're beautiful, excellent, and kind. Everyone who sees you can't take their eyes off you. So when I see someone like that around you, I panic. I'm afraid you'll leave me, because I can't selfishly stop you from pursuing what you truly want." Insecurity and pain spread like vines through his veins. I rushed forward and hugged him tightly, tears staining his shirt. I only like you. I only want you. I want to meet you again in my next life and continue being your lover. I explained my relationship with Don to Herbert. With the misunderstandings cleared up, Herbert and I resumed our loving relationship. When I came home from class, Herbert was sitting in the living room. Seeing me return, he looked up from his documents and said, Don came to the company today. He mentioned he talked to you about the will. I nodded slowly. He did. He was silent for a moment and asked, don't you have any questions for me? I shook my head. No, I like you, so I should trust you. That's why I only believe what you say. I don't trust what others say. Love is trust. I want to believe in Herbert, and I need to believe in Herbert. Herbert took out the will and placed it on the table. I glanced at it, waiting for him to speak. When I left the Ford family years ago, your father helped me a lot in the early days of my business. He had a lot of respect for me. When the lawyer came to me with the will, I was surprised, but at that time, I mostly wanted to repay your father's kindness to me. After you became an adult, I transferred all the assets your father left me to your name. I was aware of this because I signed many documents after coming of age. Herbert had taught me many times not to sign any documents carelessly and to carefully read the contracts. I asked him, why didn't you tell me when I signed the documents after coming of age? Herbert gave a self-deprecating smile. I was afraid you'd think I only took care of you for the money. I was afraid you might leave and that I might never see you again. I looked at Herbert for a long time. I won't sign a prenuptial agreement in the future. Every penny you earn after we're married will be mine too. Herbert raised an eyebrow, a meaningful smile spreading across his face. Are you proposing to me? That's when I realized I might have just proposed to Herbert. No way. I turned to flee, but he grabbed my wrist and pulled me into his embrace. Herbert's voice was low and soothing. I could never bear to have you sign a prenuptial agreement. Every penny I earn will be yours. I only want you. I started a simple life with Herbert. Every day was sweet and carefree. After leaving the office, I walked towards Venus Bridges. Who was waiting for me? She asked. What did the professor want to see you about? I couldn't hide my excitement. Remember that joint training program? I got the spot. I knew you could do it. Venus Bridges was even happier than I was and hugged me excitedly. Then she calmed down and looked at me, hesitating as if she wanted to say something. I encouraged her to speak directly without being shy. Your relationship with Herbert has just stabilized. Will he let you go? Can your relationship withstand 2 years of being apart in different countries? If he asks you to choose between your studies and him, what will you choose? Venus Bridges' questions didn't make me think for long, because I already had the answer in my heart. I pushed open the study door, and Herbert looked up from the pile of documents when he heard the noise. I stared at him for a long time, my heart pounding uncontrollably, as if it might leap out of my throat. Herbert spoke first. What's wrong? I took a deep breath, my voice trembling. I watched my father die in front of me. When I called for emergency help, they taught me how to perform CPR. I felt my father's life slipping away bit by bit, his heartbeat stopping in my hands. From that moment on, I wanted to become a doctor who saves lives and prevents more children from losing their parents. You know how excellent my grades are, and you know how hard I've worked. My teachers praise my talent. I've been given the opportunity to study abroad for 2 years. I know our relationship has just been confirmed and is not yet stable. 2 years apart is a huge challenge for us, but I still have to go. I can't waste my talent. I'm very sorry, but if you ask me to choose between my studies and you, I would choose my studies, not you. Herbert looked at me with a calm expression. I felt icy all over. My fists clenched at my sides. I was scared that Herbert would force me to make a choice or even propose a breakup. The atmosphere was tense and eerie, so quiet that I could hear my own heartbeat. Herbert smiled slightly. You're only going abroad, not to the afterlife. Whether the distance affects our relationship shouldn't be your concern. I'm wealthy and have a private jet. I can visit you frequently. I know how hard you've worked, and I won't let you waste your talent or give up this great opportunity. I've seen how hard you study while sitting beside me in the study. I won't let your efforts go to waste. In the early days when I brought you back, you were so weak that I would check your pulse while you were asleep to make sure you were still alive. I cared for you carefully, not to make you sacrifice your own desires. If you chose me today, I wouldn't be touched. I would just be disappointed. My throat felt tight, and my eyes grew moist. A tear fell silently. Herbert stood up and walked over to me, gently wiping away the tear. He cupped my face, his eyes full of a deep, heartfelt tenderness. I could clip your wings and keep you in a cage, making you a cage canary, and I would have the power to do so, but I won't. I can't stop you from becoming a better person and seeing a wider world. What I want to do is let you fly high, be your strongest support, and safeguard you. This way, you can do what you want without any worries, because as long as you look back, I'll always be here. With red eyes, I remained silent. Herbert kissed my eyelid, his lips trailing along my cheek to my ear. He said, "Don't be afraid of anything because I'll always be here." I raised my hand to cup his face and kissed his lips. I thought, I want to meet Herbert in my next life and be with him, never leaving, growing old together. The story ends here. Feel free to subscribe to the channel for the latest content, with many novels updated daily.